Welcome, this is Nan Feist, and this video today is going to be for those clients of mine that need a pelvic correction but can't always get here to me to get that pelvis corrected. So I put together this series of exercises that would help them correct their pelvis bones when they've gone out of alignment. So we're going to start by looking at a pelvis. I have my little handy dandy pelvis right here. The pelvis is made up of 3 bones. A lot of people think the pelvis is one solid bone. You'd be surprised how many people think the pelvis is one solid bone, despite the fact that they know that a baby comes out of here. But how would a baby come out of here if this was one solid, immovable bone? Instead, it's 3 bones. It's the sacrum bone. This is the sacrum bone right here. It connects to the spine above it. The spine and the sacrum are a very old part of you, back to the fish body when you had a head and a tail, and you would sidewind your way through the water. The spine really relates, the sacrum really relates to the spine. These 2 bones on the other side are the 2 ilium bones, commonly referred to as the hip bone. But what is a hip bone, right? These are ilium bones. This ilium bone has the flare of what we consider our hips when we put our hands on our hips, whatever a hips is, right? This is the flare of the ilium bone, as well as the socket here, where the femur bone would come up here and articulate in this ball and socket joint. This could be considered the hips. I consider this to be the hip. When people say the hip, I refer to the femur bone that comes up into the socket and that articulation of that joint. This bone and the rest of this, I really consider to be the pelvic bones. Okay, so this ilium bone that contains the hip socket for the hip joint also has a ischial tuberosity down here, more commonly referred to as the sit bone, and that's how I will be referring to it, as the sit bone. When we are sitting on top of our pelvis correctly loaded, we should be sitting on those sit bones. More commonly, we see people kind of back here in what I like to call couch potato position, or maybe bad dog with our tail tucked under off of our sit bones. Sometimes you find people who also sit way up here in front of their sit bones. This might be how a dog would maybe try to sit down on the ground with his tail up in the air. His pelvis would be all the way forward, so maybe this is happy dog position. This is bad dog position. This is a neutral right on top of those bones. So this ilium bone had the hip socket in it, had the sit bone underneath it, had this flare of the hip, this part of the pelvic bowl. It makes up this side wall of the pelvic bowl, and it also is this pubic bone. Lots of people think that the pubic bone is one solid bone, but you can see it's really these 2 bones that come together to create a pubic bone in the front. You have an ilium on both sides of your body. It connects to the sacrum on both sides. These 2 are the sacroiliac or SI joints, these 2 joints right here. These, like 2 puzzle pieces, would come together and fit together. And they have a lot of soft tissue that connects those 2 bones together. Now when you're pregnant, there is that ability for these bones to all spread apart, for this soft tissue connection between these joints to move apart, and then to come back together when you're not pregnant anymore. That allows for this pelvis to really move, so the baby's head and body could come down through here. Even in the male pelvis, it's really required that a lot of mobility happen in the pelvis, just in walking, in this motion. But these bones can get misaligned very easily. I always say, I've never met one really that isn't misaligned. It's so possible for them to be misaligned. Here we are with these 2 iliums that have the femur bones that come up into the socket. We have these 2 legs that we stand on, and this one spine that comes up out of there. Very easy situation to get misaligned, misloaded. This ilium I like to refer to as part of the leg. It's got the hip, the flare of the hip here, the pubic bone, the hip socket and the sit bone, and the leg bone. It really relates to the earth on both sides, where the sacrum really connects to the spine, and it really relates to the spine. So these are more about legs, these are more about spine. how these two pieces come together. And it's very easy for us to get them out of alignment. So, we're going to look at how to correct those bones when they're in misalignment. How to self-correct those bones when they're in misalignment. Now, they could get out of misalignment in many different planes. One could slide up while the other slides down. That could be misaligned in this head-to-toe plane, this superior-inferior plane. One could slip up, one could slip down. That's a possibility of misalignment. There is this possibility of this misalignment in the anterior and posterior, forward to backward plane, where one could get slid forward or the other could get slid backward. One could get stuck back here, and this one would be moving all over the place, but this one wouldn't be moving at all. Another possibility is for rotation to happen. We call this a flare, when this one side might flare out. It would be like you'd be standing like that with this hip bone flared out to this side. Pretty common thing to see a flare in one side or the other. It also could be an in-flare, that I would be in-flared on one particular side. Okay, and then the whole thing could be in a rotation to the left. Very common for right-handers who turn to the left with their right hand. Or it could be turned to the right. Less common to see it turn to the right. More common to see it with the typical right-hander pattern of rotating a little bit to the left. In that situation, it's also going to rotate the spine, because the sacrum that's been, this rotating here is all rotating over here to the side. I'm making this extreme. It's a little rotation, not a big, huge rotation. So we're going to look at all those possibilities for misalignment and for realignment. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is how to determine if you have a misalignment in your pelvis. So, I do this test to see, called the forward bend test, whether these two bones are really moving appropriately at this SI, sacroiliac joint. When I forward bend, can't see it in the spine, in this example, because I just have a pelvis, but if my spine were forward bending, my pelvis would actually be, these two iliums would drop backward as I come forward. If one of them did not drop backward, appeared to be lifting upward while the other one was dropping backward, I would know I have a misalignment because they're not moving together the way they should be moving together. It is the one that appears to be coming upward, or is actually just stuck in position while the other one is dropping backward, but it often feels as if one is creeping up. The one that is moving upward is the one that we say is the fixed joint. Okay, so if I were doing this test in my studio on someone, I would have them sit, on the point of the stool. Because if you sit on the point of the stool, you're more likely to get your two sit bones to be sitting on the chair. If you're sitting against the flat part, maybe you can see better if I come over here, it's more typical that your femur bones would be sitting on the chair than your sit bones. But if I sit on the point, I'm sure to get my two sit bones to be sitting on the point. So I simply put my two hands back here on the iliums, put my hands on my hip like a mom in a stern position would be putting her hands on her hips, and I have them forward bend over as if to touch the floor, and then rotate back up or roll back up. And then I just see which one of those two is moving upward in space. So I'm going to turn around and do that with my hands on there. See if you can't see what I'm talking about the one side that is fixed or upward while the other side is dropping back. I have a very common misalignment in my own pelvis personally, so wouldn't be surprised if it's there today. Okay, here I am. In the back of my pelvis, I have my two hands, my two thumbs right here on my two SI joints. Right? I'm going to forward bend. As I do that, well, watch these two thumbs to see if one of them possibly goes up and the other goes down as I curl over. And then I'll roll back up. So I felt this left one arising, this right one dropping down. Remember, it's not really arising, it's fixed. It just feels like it's arising, when the reality is that the right one was actually dropping back. let's look at it again. Here I go with my hands placed on my ilium and my thumbs on my SI joint. I am curling down. You can see this thumb is higher than that thumb is down there. This SI higher than this one down here. And I'm going to roll back up and come back up. So that tells me that I have a fix in the left sacroiliac joint. So when I'm looking at misalignment, I'm always looking at the one that's fixed. So I could say that I had an upshift on my left side or a downshift on my right side. Both of those would be the same, but I say I have an upshift on my left side rather than a downshift on my right side because it's the left side that's fixed. I don't necessarily have that predicament. I'm just saying I'm always looking at it from the perspective of the side that's fixed. In this case, it's my left side that was fixed a little bit. So I'm just going to put my hands on the very top of this curve, this, what some people call hips, this flare of the ilium to see how they align up. And you can see that this right one slightly lower than this left one. So indeed, in this case, I do have, in this particular plane up here, the left one lifted upward and the right one dropped downward. So if you were doing this for yourself, you need to check to see this level. You might need a mirror to look in. Now I can feel that difference, but not by experience with my clients that they have no idea what that feels like, even though I go, can you feel that? I have to say, pick up your head and look at that. I usually do this laying down on my track table, but I thought it would be easier to see with me sitting up facing the camera. Okay, so I know that I have a high left ilium and a low right ilium, or an upshift on the left and a downshift on the right. I don't really say downshift on the right because I'm looking at it from the perspective of the fixed side, which is the left side. The next thing I'm going to do is take a look at these two front parts of the pelvis. I was up here on this part of the pelvis, and I still am up here on this part of the pelvis when I was doing the up-down to see if they were level. Now I'm kind of shifting here to the front, these 2 points of the front of the ilium. See how they stick out there like that? To see, are they level? Does one appear to be more forward there, the one and one backward, or possibly that way? This would be a left rotation with the right one coming forward and the left looking back. This would be a left. This would be a right rotation with the left one coming forward and the right back. This would be a left rotation with the right forward and the left back. I never could tell my left from my right. Okay, so here I am with my hands on those 2 bones in the very front, the anterior superior iliac spine, if you have to be specific about it. Okay, and you can see that my right one is a little more forward than my left one. Maybe you can see that. And that is because I'm a little bit in left rotation. And I am a typical right-hander. I'm a very definite right-hander. And I tend to be a little bit into left rotation. So if I have a little bit of left rotation, I don't personally worry about a little bit of left rotation for myself. We will correct it. If I saw it on someone, I would ask them, are you right-handed? And if they said, well, yeah, absolutely, I'm right-handed. They said, no, I'm left-handed. Then I might worry about a left rotation. Now, left-handers aren't typically truly left-handed. They can be ambidextrous, so that's a whole other issue we'll set aside. But if I saw this in a right rotation and the person was a right-hander, I would be most worried about it being in right rotation. Something is wrong for the pelvis to be over here if I'm moving over there most of the time. So here I note that in this particular plane, this east-west plane, this transverse plane, that I'm a little bit into left rotation. And I remember that I was in an upward shift on the left side as well. So 2 different things going on here. The next thing I do is look at this ASIS, this point high on the pelvis, as compared to the very middle of my belly. From my navel to here, how far is that? And from my navel to here, how far is that? Now I can feel that this navel to this side is smaller than the navel to this side. Maybe you can't see that. I try sometimes to show people by putting my pinky here on this point. And look at how far that is all the way to my thumb. That far apart. But on this side, it's only that far apart, not quite as far. So my navel appears to be drawn over here to my left side a little bit more than my right side, but it's really this bone that is inflared in here, pulling that over here. So I make a notation of that and I say, that's really interesting that the left side is not only upshifted and left rotated, but it's got a little inflare in it at the same time. So the final plane that I look at is really this plane of forward and backward, of how my pelvis might move this way. And this is a pretty common pattern to be doing in walking. It also tends to be a kind of a common thing for people to stand in one forward position or another. And I usually check this from the pubic bone. I just put my hands on the top of the pubic bone together at center, and I begin to walk myself out to see if they're level. It's a little harder to show that here in the way we are. So we're just going to look at it this way. We're going to just rotate the right forward and the left backward. That's a possibility. Now we're going to rotate the left forward and the right backward, and that's a possibility. And of these two possibilities, which one feels more natural? Is it this forward one here? Or this forward one here? For me, it's this forward one here. If the top of this pelvis is forward on the top, then the pubic bone must be posterior on the bottom. By that I mean, this one doesn't really rotate because it's fixed. But if this ilium here were to rotate forward at the top, it would push the pubic bone backward at the bottom. On the other possibility, if the ilium bone were dropped backward here, it would cause the front to come forward. So I said my possibility of the right forward and the left backward is what feels normal, what feels natural, is more easy for me to slip into that than it is for me to do this. It's a bit of work for me to do this. Okay, having said that, all of these possibilities of the way that the pelvis moves, there's typically a pattern to them. Sometimes when people come to see me because they have an emergency, they've slipped, they've fallen, they've torqued something, I'll see something that's an anomaly and I'll correct it, and after a few times we start to see the same pattern emerge, that they always have the left side up, sometimes they have the left side down, but typically we see mostly the same set of patterns. And that's because the pelvis gets into a little groove, it likes to live in that little groove, and the soft tissue kind of accommodate that little groove, and we end up living in that little groove, and it likes to slip into that little groove. So that's why I say, which one feels more natural? This one is more difficult for me to sustain. This one, oh yeah, I could live here all day long. I could let that one fall down, that one fall back all day long. But remember I said, it depends upon the side that's fixed. So then rather than saying I'm forward on the right side, I'm actually posterior on the left side. I'm actually dropping back on this left side, which makes my pubic bone come forward up towards the ceiling on the left side. So if I were really to present what this looks like on somebody, and I usually do this so they get an idea of it. I have a high left side, I have an inflared left side. I also have it shifted backward with the pubic bone forward a little bit. So this is how I'm really presenting in my pelvis. And when I show people this is how you're really presenting, sometimes they'll go, oh yeah, that's how I stand when or oh yeah, I was just sitting in that position in the car the other day, or something like that. That's why I show them that, so they can really get an idea of what it feels like when their pelvis is misaligned. Because our brain is very, 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 very good at telling us, oh, you're good, you're normal, you're neutral, you're really square, you're solid, when in actuality we're twisted, and we just think that we're solid. Okay, So correcting these things can be a bit of a challenge. Easier for somebody else to correct them on you, but I really wanted this video to be about self-correcting for all my people who are not coming in here because of coronavirus or having difficulty and can't make it in here, to be able to self-correct them. The easiest, most bang for your buck one to correct is the up-down one, the lift up on one side, the drop down on the other side. And I will typically find for people that if it is your tendency to be lifted up on this side and down on that side, it's probably always going to be that way. So just know what your particular pattern is, and I usually write those things down, and over time people get to see this is their typical pattern, and so here's how I correct it. But in self-correction, it's just easier to throw that all out the window for the moment and just to correct both sides. So this corrections that I'm doing today is really an osteopathic correction. So, and osteopathy is really about taking it to the place that it already is so your body can realize where it is and release itself. So in this case, I'm upshifted on the left side, so I'm going to upshift it even more and ask it to let it down and release. I am asking you to really listen and pay attention and feel for that release to happen. I will do the right side in down slip, hoping that it'll set itself up upright too, because this is what I have going on kind of in both sides. And it's usually a good idea for the up-down shift, just correct it all and then recheck yourself and you should be balanced. So I have, I'm going to do this over here on my track table. I'm just going to get a little pillow for my head. And I have this little ball here for my leg. Since it's my left side that is stuck, I'm going to do my left side first. And I'm going to lay down on my right side and bring this right leg forward to kind of get it out of the way. I put this little round ball, could be any kind of ball. For me it's a slow-mo ball, but it could be any kind of ball. I'm just going to put it down here underneath my knee, a little lower than my knee. I want you to make sure that you're not falling back here or falling forward here. As we do this correction, it's kind of common for people as they lift up here to kind of drop back into the groove, right? So, or bend their knee. It's not a knee bending job, and it's not a dropping back job. It's also not in the hip socket down here as people think of it. It's really my inner thigh that comes up inside of here, my SI that's back here. So I'm really thinking about this deep inside line of my pelvis. And all I'm going to do is ask that deep inside line of my pelvis to suck all the way up here. And I'm just going to hold it for a few seconds and breathe. And it should respond by lengthening back out. I say it always feels like growing long, releasing. It takes a few seconds to feel that. I'm going to do it again. I'm just rolling up over the ball. Put this ball down a little bit. I'm just rolling upward over the ball and waiting for my spine to release. If it was a down slip on this side, I do the same thing, rolling my whole pelvis down over the ball and waiting, here it goes, for it to kind of cinch back in place, right? I would just reach it down there and my body would respond by going, oh no you don't, and pull me right back in place. I could then lift up again, waiting for my body to go, oh no you don't, and push me back down to center. So that's really all there is to self-correcting and upshift. In my days, my early days in physical therapy, I learned a lot of ballistic techniques for pulling this sacrum or this ilium down in the socket, down back into placement. And it would work sometimes. It's very ballistic. It's very hard on those joints to be pushing them in and out of place. I just find it's much calmer and nicer, and it really works better to be working with the body to correct itself rather than be doing some external maneuver on the body. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is turn to my other side and do this whole same thing on the right side, even though I said I'm really correcting the side that's fixed and not the other side. This is my exception. I always correct up, down on both sides. So I'm lying on this side. Got this leg out of the way, have this ball. Just for the sake of it, I'm going to put this leg behind me so you can see. I'm going to put this ball here. I'm really thinking about this inside line that comes up into my sacrum. This is a downshift side, right? Because the other side was an upshift. So I'm going to reach down and wait for my body to self-correct. It's just going to feel like it just curls back in place. Right? I reach down, lengthening out the inside line over that ball, and my body just responds by ricocheting back in place. I could lift it up in here then and wait, and it would grow out of there. Very subtle feeling. So be very patient. Listen, don't do it right. Right? Because if you're trying to do it the way Nan says, or the right way, you probably won't do it right. But if you're really exploring, you're not going to fail. You're going to feel something. You're going to feel, oh yeah, that feels really good. To feel that come right back down in alignment. Okay, that's a correction for the up-down shift. The next correction that I do is for the transverse, or the rotation. Remember I said I was slightly rotated to the left. This one was higher than that one. I would go back here and put your hands back on your hips and check now to see that you're even. You could even sit down on the chair again and curl forward to see if you're still up on that hip, or maybe you've fixed and neither of you fixed that correction. You've released that correction. It's probably a better way to say that. And no longer are you fixed. Great, if one plane fixes it, I'm really happy for you. But we're doing all planes here. This is the rotation that I said. Also tends to get a little bit into the spine. Tends to get a little bit into the spine. And here I am in this left rotation. So in order to correct this left rotation, I'm going to lay down on my belly and bring my pelvis forward into right rotation. Really it's neutral, but it's going to feel like right rotation. And kind of wait until my body shifts there to correct that. So it's a little tricky to do this one. I use a couple of pillows at my ankle. And then I have to have a little pad to put underneath my hip. So this is just a wash rag that I bought from Costco that I have folded in half again, folded in half again, and folded in half one more time. So I just have this little pad here that I'm going to put underneath me right on my ilium. Right on that anterior superior iliac spine, that high point, this point right here on the sit bone, on the ilium bone. So I'm going to lay down on my belly. Doesn't matter what your head does, don't worry about it. My leg's going to come up here on this pillow, just my left leg. And this pad is going under my left hip. Right, so I've got this pad under my left hip. If I didn't have this pad here, if I was just laying here, and I put my two hands underneath my hips, I would see that the right one is closer down to the ground. But there's a space under here in the left one. That will show me again that I'm in this left rotation. This left side is higher than this right side, or rotated more to the left. So I'm putting this pad under here as a feedback loop. I'm going to pull my hip into that pad. It's really important to pull your pelvis into that pad, but release the leg. So I'm letting my leg go, and it's being held by these pillows. Creates kind of a suspension for the leg, kind of a lengthening for the leg, while I'm pushing my hip down into the pad. I normally have my clients do fist over fist, rest their head on their fists, but I'm going to stay up here so that you can hear me. I'm just going to pull my hip down into that pad, relax my leg, breathe, and feel that kind of unwinding, that twisting feeling that starts to happen in the pelvis. It feels so delicious. Again, if I open my observatory mind and let right mind stay out, I can feel the shifting. Dance. My teacher used to say, stay with the dance all the way to the end of the dance. So I typically like to stay with that feeling, and I'm telling myself, breathe and relax, and oh, let go of that leg. Keep that hip down. Let go of that leg. Let that unwinding happen. It usually takes inside of a minute somewhere. But I really like people to get to the point, if they can, of really feeling the unwind more than just waiting a minute. Okay, now when I slip this pad out of here, you see how I just dropped down into there? I'm much more even in my two hips. I don't have that same tendency toward the spine being lifted. It really doesn't matter what your head does. Some people think, well, it's because I got my head over here, so my pelvis is over here. No, if you rotated this way, you probably fell into your groove over there, but you didn't have to. Your head couldn't have done that on its own. Okay, the spine has still got a little rotation in it because it's used to being in this groove over here. Everything's going to find their way back. So I like to do this little exercise that helps correct the rotation in the spine. So I'm taking these pillows away. And I'm going to have two of these pads now, one for each side. Make sure that you have the same two towels so that you don't have one big one and one small one, and they're folded to the same exact height. They're going to go under both of my hips. What they're going to have a tendency to do is to lift my hips up this way, drop my tail back down this way. And that is a neutral pelvis. That's what we're always looking for. Maybe in yoga you've learned to lift those hips forward. In Pilates we are always trying to work on leveling the pelvis this way and lifting up in the front rather than spilling out like beer belly, but lifting up, engaging the internal oblique and lengthening the spine rather than this collapse. Okay, so I'm going to lay down on the table and I'm going to put this pad under this leg, under this hip, and this one under this hip. Take great care to make sure they're at the same level and they feel the same, that you're not shifted in one side or the other side. So here I am with a pelvis that has been stabilized, so it's not going to move. And all I'm going to do is lift my left leg and then lift my right leg and alternate back and forth. Now if I didn't have this pad here, my hip, you see how my hip could come forward into the table when I lifted my leg. That would be an action that's in my pelvis. But because I put this pad here, I'm eliminating that action in my pelvis on both sides. So that when I lift a leg and another leg, my pelvis can't shift around like normally it would. When I'm doing this correcting someone, I'm always looking for if it's the same. When I lift this leg and I might shift over onto my right side. When I lift my left leg, do I shift back? Excuse me, when I lift my right leg, do I also shift back on my left side? Probably not. More commonly what I see is when I lift the left leg, I shift right. When I lift the right leg, I also shift right. That's telling me something is wrong in the spine. But what we're doing here is working with the intelligence of the body. So as I am lifting one leg and lifting the other leg, keeping the pelvis from moving, the spine gets this information that something's different and it's going to have to shift. I generally say to my people who are doing this, make sure that you're lifting the whole leg from the hamstring, not lifting the lower leg. Right? If you can't lift the leg, it's okay to think you're lifting the leg. It still causes the spine to come online to do some work. And try, if you can, opening your observatory mind to see what's the difference between my right and my left side. And notice, if you can, when that something shifts. When it's different all of a sudden, and oh, look at that, I can really lift my right leg now where I couldn't lift it as well before. Or I really feel like it doesn't any work at all to do this now. If that's the case, then you're done. That's what we're looking for. That place where the spine has made an adjustment because of the limitation of the pelvis. So that's the correction I do. for the spine. And both of those are corrections that I do for the transverse rotation, for the rotation in this east-west plane. And the final correction that I do is this, remember this flare in and flare out that I had, that I was talking about? I could be standing here this way. In my case, I'm probably more, it's really not in the leg, it's more in the pelvis. I've got a little inflare going on over here. So I'm going to correct this inflare. And this is the case where I'm not going to take it to the place that it is. I'm going to take it to the opposite place. So in an inflare, if this part of my pelvis is rotated in, the bottom part, the sit bone, will be rotated out. And that's where I happen to be living, with this bone turned in and the sit bone turned out. So how I'm going to correct that is to pull this upper part of the ilium that's turned in out and pull the lower part in. I kind of use my leg to do this because it feels like my leg can help out the lower part of the pelvis. And I'm going to lay on my back to this end. So you can see what I'm doing on this side. I usually do this lying down, but I can do it in sitting up. And we'll learn some exercises to reinforce this now that you've corrected it when we're done here. So I'm just going to push this ilium in a little bit and pull out down here. So I kind of go down here under my sit bone, pulling out and pushing my upper one in. This is where I'm stuck. I'm kind of internally rotated here at the top and externally rotated at the bottom. So I'm just feeling where I am. But this is the one case where I'm not going to what the body's doing, but going away from what the body's doing. I know it's confusing. So what I'm going to do is push this ilium out and kind of move my leg in. I'm trying to get my little sit bone to go in while this one's going out. This one, most of my clients really love. They say, oh man, does that feel good? Oh man, does that feel good when it's shifting and moving and correcting. Maybe you can see that shifting and moving in me. I just let the dance go for as long as it needs to go. When I first started doing this work, I thought, well, it's just a little flare. That one's really not as important as the other ones. But I have found that this subtle little flare makes all the difference in the world for my clients. So that's the correction that I do for the flare. And I can go back and check my two hip bones toward my center to see if they're more aligned, if they're more equal. They're not all the way over here to my left like they were, they're more equal. That's how you would check that correction out. But I'm going to go ahead and shift right onto my left side. Give myself a little pillow for my head. And we're going to do the correction for this anterior-posterior plane. I know I just said that was my last correction. I'm sorry, I forgot about this one. And I do this one inside lying because it's the easiest way. If you were here in my studio, I'd put you on your belly, I'd put my finger up underneath the pubic bone and push up on it to force it to move. But here, for self-correction, I find it easier to just move the pelvis forward and backward in this way. Remember that what feels more natural, forward or backward. And I'm not moving the whole pelvis, I'm just moving this right side. This is not my fixed side. My other side is the fixed side, but I'm starting on this side. I usually do both. What feels better, to go backward or to go forward? Is it more natural, like I could live there all day, to go backward or to go forward? When I go forward, the tail sticks out backward. When I come backward, the tail tacks under like bad dog, happy dog, or bad dog. I like this one better. I'm just going to sit here until it starts to self-correct itself and move back towards center. It's a surrender and wait for the intelligence of the body to self-correct kind of exercise. Let's do that on the left side. So I'm going to turn over, lying on my right side. And again, I'm moving backward and forward, moving the top of my pelvis back, the top of my pelvis forward. When I go backward here, my tail goes under to bad dog. When I go forward, it goes sticking out to happy dog. Is it better forward? It's really not. Is it better backward? It's really better forward. When I just went back there, it was a little painful. It felt like a little twinge. So you wouldn't want to go where the twinge is. You want to go with what's more comfortable and what's more natural. That was forward. So there I have corrected the forward and backward plane of the pelvis. And I'm going to come back to my chair. I always come back and retest, my teacher used to say. If you don't retest, then how do you know you did it right? So to retest, I again have them set on the point. I again put my hands on their two SI joints in the back, and I have them forward bend. And generally what they say is, wow, that feels a lot better. What I generally see is it's a much easier thing to do now than it was the first time. But what I'm watching for are those two SI joints. Are they even now? Are they both dropping down? So I'm going to show you that from the back. With my hands on these two SI joints right here, as I bend forward and come back, they're both the same. One doesn't come up more than the other. One doesn't slide down more than the other. They are very similar. Then I no longer have a fix in my sacroiliac joint. So after I've corrected the misalignments in the sacroiliac joint, in the whole of the pelvis, we want to start moving it together and having it move, having it have some integrity in what it's doing now. Teach it to move appropriately. So I start with the simple cat in sitting exercise that I developed over the course of time to get people to start moving in better posture and better alignment. So I fall back off my sit bones till I'm in bad dog position. I'm also in this Pilates C curve. I'm going to curve this whole body over, taking my sit bones with it. When I get up here, I notice that I'm really weight bearing on my feet and my sit bones. So I'm going to arch up, taking these with me, up into cat. And then I'm going to curl them back again, all the way back into bad dog, and right up on top of my sit bones. I'll do this a few times. I drop backward, I dive over the top, taking these SI with me. I arch up, sticking my tail out to bad dog, or to happy dog, and turning it under to bad dog to pull myself back. And coming right up on the sit bones. And one more time, we're going to rock back, behind the sit bones, bad dog position, no feet here. I'm going to curl over the top, coming onto my feet and my sit bones, and arch out, pulling up my tail and my sits bones, and my sacroiliac joint. And then I'm going to drop it down, curling underneath me again as I come back here. And back up onto my sit bones. So the spine has these natural curves in there. It has a lordosis in the lumbar spine, a kyphosis in the thoracic spine, a lordosis again in the cervical spine. It also has a little curve in the middle of the sacrum. And it just kind of all moves in this kind of snaking-like kind of way. So I like to think of my spine as one complete unit and see the forces be moving through all of those curves together. You really see that when you come back. There's this place where I'm coming back and my head is lifting out of gravity, and just about the time that it gets over me, my spine will unfold to push me back up into length. And I like for that moment of unfolding, or the primordial response, right? That anti-gravity sequence happening. So I'm going to do this one more time, see if you can see that happening at this moment. So I'm rolling back here. My head is really back here behind my center of gravity, and I'm taking it forward. It's hanging way out here, not in my center of gravity. And as my tail curls back, okay, I did arch, right? And then as I curl, and my tail comes back, lining each one of these vertebrae, pulling backward. But more importantly, my head coming over my center. There's this moment where it's it's out of gravity, and my spine just naturally pushes upward. It feels like just a sudden lift. You can kind of see it when we practice this easy sitting pose. This is my easy sitting pose. I have people drop back here on the couch potato, bad dog, and rock forward up here in happy dog. Now at this point, when you're back here in bad dog, you're not on your feet and you're really weight bearing. As my tail begins to push down and back, notice that it's pushing me up. There's a point at which it's pushed me up out of gravity before, as I go forward, I would collapse again. That's where I want to live. I want to feel this moment where my pelvis is pushing up through my discs to suspend me upright. That's where I would sit all the time, in that moment of suspension of the discs all working, instead of collapse like we typically tend to do. Okay, one more time. We're dropping back. We're curling over the top. We are arching out. We're curling back. We're waiting for that moment of our spine to unwind. Good. We're going to do two more quick exercises. One is for the side bend, the up-down piece. Right? I'm going to side bend over here, dropping down into this hip. This hip's full weight bearing. Sit bone dropping into the chair. It's going to push off that to suspend me back up. I'm going to fall over on this side, dropping down into that pelvis. Remember I had a high pelvis on this side? Yeah, an upshift. It's dropping down. And push out of it to come back. And I'm over here, dropping over here, and push out of it to return. So I'm going to fall over here, weight bearing, down on that sit bone, and push out of that sit bone to rise back up in that moment of suspension before I have dropped into weight bearing over here on this side, and I'm pushing out of it for that moment of suspension. I'm going to stay here in this moment of suspension on top of those two sit bones. And the very last one is this flare. Remember the flare? Here we are turning them both in and both out. Just think about your whole pelvis folding in and opening up. Fold those ilium in and open them up. And fold them in and open them up. I'm simply just folding inward and opening upward. So people either live here in this kind of splayed out kind of way, or possibly they're all the way in here. We want a neutral. For me, my tendency is to want to be out here just splayed out. So I kind of got to pull it in a little bit. For other people, they might want to be all the way in here and they need to come out just a little bit. I don't want you to go all the way to the end range, but I want you to be able to inhabit those ranges. So here we are, all the way out there, and all the way in, and all the way out, and all the way in. And we're sitting back in our neutral, whatever we think that is. We're just going to do that on one hip, turning it in, turning it out, turning it in, turning it out, turning it in, turning it out. It tends to move around my leg, right? My femur bone, in and out, and in and out. I had a tendency to be in, and go out. On this side, in and out, in and out. I'm turning it in around the femur and out around the femur, and in around the femur and out around the femur. I have a tendency to be out, then in. I'm going to do them both again. In and open up. Turn it back down. Open that flare. Close that flare down. Open that flare. When you close that flare down, notice you're in bad dog, no tail. You're sitting on your tail, no feet. When you open too far up, you're all the way here on your sit bones, front of the sit bones, on the pubic bone. Let's have a happy medium. We're turning in here, bad dog. We're coming to that place where we're suspended upright, right on top of our sit bones. Very good. Good luck with this. Thank you for tuning in. Be very well.